we did a campaign for a motion graphics company called Royale, and that was really interesting. I wasn't an art director at the time with that company, but it was still a very interesting project. So basically, but the way it usually works is the product or the client, the car company or the clothes company or whatever, approaches a ad agency, and then the ad agency comes with some sort of concept for an entire campaign, and then they approach the motion graphics house to execute some of the concepts. That's one potential road. Another thing that is sort of much more that's happening a lot more right now is that the client will approach the motion graphics directly, because at the end of the day, the motion graphics house is full of creative, conceptual thinkers. So it's a shorter path between client and execution, which is great. It works out really well. There's not a lot of people. It doesn't become designed by consensus. It's actually designed with an intention. So basically, the client would come in for a motion graphics project like that, and they will talk to the motion graphics house, and then the motion graphics house will have either on staff a creative director, or they will hire a creative director for the project. And each creative director will have a specialty, right? Like there's guys that are really good at sports. There's guys that are really good, and they're very knowledgeable about cars and race cars and they're motorheads. I'm kind of a really weird hybrid, because I'm neither. I'm like not a specialist, but I'm really good with the fantasy stuff. For whatever reason, I always get called to do fantasy stuff. So I'm always doing fantasy stuff. I don't mind it. I like it. And I think maybe it was because I got stuck doing a lot of superhero stuff that maybe sort of like I did some stuff for a video game for Tron, and then everybody would call me after that and say like, hey, can we get that Tron look in our vodka commercial? Or can we get that Tron thing in this, like, I don't know, No Child Left Behind commercial? Like, like everybody just wanted to look for a look. Like, but anyway, so then, the creative director will engage with the client and see, okay, so what is the problem that we're trying to solve? What is the narrative? And then, he will relay that information to his team of art directors and say, okay, so this is the problem. Have certain solutions, and let's see how we can visually interpret those solutions. So for example, just to be very specific, the client says that people feel like the car is too luxurious, and we want to target it to young people. So how do we do that? So then the questions come, okay, what kind of young people? What's your demographic? This and that. But most importantly, what is the imagery that you want associated with you want this to be like all access, like for example, a company like Scion, like Scion, they want full access urban. That's one thing, but Lexus might not want to go that direction. So you get very specific with the questions for the problem. And then when you relay them to your art directors, they start thinking about it in a visual manner. And what's beautiful about motion graphics is that each art director has its own language. And that's the best part. So then, everybody presents their solutions, and then the creative director oversees them and sees which ones have potential, which ones are closer to the solution. And at this point, you're not thinking about software. You're not thinking about how are we going to execute that? Because if you think about that, that sort of destroys the creative process in a way. It limits it. I guess it's a balance, because you need to be a little bit responsible about it too, given whatever budget you're given. So if somebody says like, oh, this is a very small budget, you're not going to think about explosions and horses turning into water and this and that, you know what I mean? So, you keep the budget in mind, but you're also, it's your job to be creative. So it's better to like start here and then chop it, which always happens. So then once the problem is solved or sort of addressed, it's presented to the client in the form of storyboards or what we call style frames. And these are beauty frames, these fantastic shots of the commercial or the product or that just showcase the idea in its best possible way. And so if the style frames get approved, which is usually a lot of rounds of back and forth, the concept might be good, the framing might be good, but the client might not like the red, they might like the green. And then a good creative director would always say, okay, why are we changing the green? Why are we changing the red? It's not my job to question the client. It's my job to make his statements mean something for the brand. You know, not just to be a dick and say like, oh, why are you like this has no basis. What do you want to change this and that? No, that's not my job. My job is to say, okay, I understand your concern. Is your concern a personal concern, or is your concern something that is a little bit more global that we can address? You know what I mean? Are people responding to this call, or is it just you personally? That kind of stuff. And you know, you gotta be tactful. Gotta be good with it. And then, you know, once you finish the round of style frames, you put together storyboards, which could either be hand-drawn or they could be animatics. We usually use Maya for the animatics, and we do a process which is very basic, which is called rendering play blasts. And what a play blast is just a gray, rough representation of the animation throughout the spot and the effects or whatever is there. So once we present the storyboards, which are just stills, or the play blast, and that gets approved, then we go into full production mode. And then once you're in full production mode, you have people that are in charge of the look development. So for example, the spot from Lexus that we were talking about, this imaginary spot from Lexus, and they wanted something that it's light and connects to people and does this and that. Then we say, okay, but what does that look like? And then what programs are we going to use for that? Because we could use, you know, depending on the creative, we could use RealFlow to make the light behave like water, but then we tell the renderers, and the renderers are people that are in charge of lighting and actually outputting the image. And we tell the renderers, okay, we want, even though this is going to behave like water, we want you to treat it as light. So it will illuminate everything on its path. So that's where the creative process begins, and that's, the technical process begins. So you have the look development, but you also start figuring out what kind of technology. And all of this never happens as clean as I'm telling you. This stuff happens everything at the same time sometimes. So then, while these guys start sort of executing and creating shaders, shaders are, think about it as like the actual material. You know, if you got to build a metal shader that's rusted, or a metal shader that is very glossy, they start creating these. Different rendering engines are used to create these images and interpret these materials properly in the light. You can use Mental Ray, V-Ray, Arnold, or Octane, and each render engine has a different way of processing these images. And it doesn't matter; they're all good. A good renderer will figure out how to work all of them. Some are faster for certain things than others, but it's certainly at some point it's all the same thing. To be honest with you. So these guys, you know, they're figuring out the look, and then you have the animators. They're animating. If you have live action plates, it complicates the process a little bit because you have to stabilize them if they're not stabilized, and that's just basically a process of taking an image and making sure it's not shaky. If they're screen, it has to be keyed out, or it has to be cleaned out. Most motion graphics houses will use After Effects for that. It's very powerful. Most visual effects houses will use Nuke for that. The difference between them is that Nuke is a very powerful compositing program, which means that Nuke can take, you know, hundreds of CG passes, like just the specularity right here, just the color, just the shadow, just isolate pieces of the render, the full image, and then put them together, that's very powerful at doing that. Whereas After Effects can do that, but you can also animate, and you can animate a whole bunch of really cool stuff in there as well. So it's just two different programs. But anyways, the motion graphics houses usually use After Effects, and the VFX houses use Nuke most of the time. So while all the animation is happening, and the rendering and the look development, everything sort of starts piping through the compositors, and then, or the comp artists, and then the compositors are the guys that sort of put all this stuff together and build a final image. And then maybe we'll go to color correction, or the color compositor will actually do a final color correction on it. And, you know, throughout this entire process, there's always feedback with the client. And then eventually you deliver the project. So that's more of the technical pipeline part of it. Yeah.